I'd like to call to order the May 9th, 2023 regular board meeting. May I have a motion to approve the agenda?
Madam Chair,
Mr. Trapp,
I move that we approve the agenda for the May 9th, 2023 regular board meeting.
is there a second?
Second.
The motion has been made by Mr. Trapp and seconded by Dr. Scott to approve the agenda. Is there any discussion? There's no discussion. Board members, please vote. And the vote is 7 yes, 0 no. The motion carries. Item 4, executive session. May I have a motion for executive session?
Madam Chair,
Mrs. Nash.
I move we convene an executive session for the purpose of discussing admission requests into the district's adult education program, student appeals, breach of contracts, employment recommendations, and certified releases, and property and contractual matters.
Is there a second?
Second.
So the motion has been made to convene an executive session for student admission request into the adult education program, student appeals, breach of contracts, employment recommendations, and certified releases, and property and a contractual matter regarding the leasing and purchase of properties. Is there any discussion? The motion was made by, Mrs. Nash and seconded by Mrs. Porter. There's no discussion. Board members, please vote.
That's correct.
Please vote. And the vote is 7 yes, 0 no. The motion carries. The board will now convene an executive session. May I have a motion to adjourn executive session?
Madam Chair,
Mr. Trapp.
I move that we, I move that we adjourn executive session at 6:26 p.m. and resume public session.
Is there a second?
Second.
The motion has been made by Mr. Trapp to adjourn executive session at 6:26 and reconvene into our general session, and it's been seconded by Mrs. Nash. Is there any discussion? There's no discussion. Board members, please vote.
But I'm a yes.
And the vote is 7 yes, 0 no. The motion carries. Item 5, Inspirational Moment, Pledge of Allegiance. Mrs. McFadden.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. For our inspirational moment tonight, we have Mr. Nathaniel Spells, President and CEO of Construction Dynamics Incorporated. Mr. Spells was born in Bowman, South Carolina, but his family moved to Columbia when he was 4 and matriculated through the Richland 1 school system. When he graduated, he went on to Clemson University, where he became the first African American to graduate with a degree in Building Sciences and Management in the School of Architecture. After graduating college, General Electric Real Estate and Construction Management Division in New York offered Mr. Spells a position in their firm to manage construction projects in plastic divisions. He went on to pursue his dreams of entrepreneurship in 1987 and established CDI, Construction Dynamics Incorporated. The firm is licensed in South Carolina, North Carolina, and Georgia. He has constructed several projects throughout the state, including Benedict College Football Stadium, Administrative Building, Business Development Center, Richland Baptist Church Sanctuary, and Conference Center. Multiple churches and the University of South Carolina closed hit renovations, part of the Fireflies Minor League Baseball Stadium, and school projects in Richland 1 and 2, Charleston, Orangeburg, Beaufort County, Sumter County, South Carolina State University, as well as the nursing building in Orangeburg Tech. He is passionate about business ownership, teaching construction business principles, and establishing generational business practices. His son, Nate Jr., is following in his footsteps to continue his legacy with the hopes of his grandchildren, Nate III and Caitlin, will carry on. Without further ado, Mr. Nathaniel Spells.
Okay. Good evening. I'd like to thank Ms. McFadden for extending us an invitation to come before you and introduce my company. Along with me is Nathaniel Spells Jr., who represents the next generation of construction dynamics. I was told we have about 7 minutes to present, so I won't be long. When I started my company back in 1987, I prayed to God that we could, to bless our firm so we could be a blessing to others, and he's done exactly that. We also want to be an inspiration to others, particularly those in the underserved communities. The CDI portfolio has been mentioned. We've done a number of K-12 projects. We work for Richland 1. We've done work here at Richland 2, Sumter School District, Orangeburg 5, Charleston School District, Berkeley School District, and Beaufort. Higher education, we work for USC, done projects at Clemson University, Orangeburg, South Carolina State, in Orangeburg, Orangeburg Tech, Morris College, to name a few. We also have built a number of religious institutions. Has been mentioned, Brooklyn Baptist Church has been one of our clients. We built the First Northeast Baptist Church off of Hardscrabble Road, which is a very beautiful facility. We've done, in fact, about 40 religious institutions. We've done federal work, local government work, medical, and private. Some of our landmarks you might recognize has been mentioned, Brooklyn Baptist Church campus. We did the whole campus. We believe we can build just about anything that is designed and what have you. Put it on paper and we can build it. The sanctuary at Brooklyn seats about 2,500. The Brooklyn Community Resource Center, which has a gym in it, athletic facility in it, dining facility to accommodate over 900 people. We did get used to this. We built the football stadium at Benedict. We were joint venture partners in the Spirit Communications ballpark. We've also done some work here in the district. We were the construction managers for the Richland Northeast Auxiliary Gym and renovation of the administrative spaces. We were the construction managers for the football stadium at Blackwood. We were the construction managers at Lake Carolina Elementary School. And we partnered with Thompson Turner, Forest Lake Elementary School project with them. We've done a lot of work with Thompson Turner. Construction offers a tremendous opportunities for students and for others. We have some folks who have gotten degrees in various fields, and they decided to come into construction because they can earn a very good living doing what we do. We have some folks who graduated from high school, and we encourage them to go further to continue to gain more skills. We have some that have a 2-year degree in construction management, architecture, or engineering, and we have some that have a 4-year degree. I always say construction is something that you can't outsource to other countries or whatnot. You always have a need for air conditioning, electrical, plumbing, and so forth. In terms of partnerships with various school districts, we provide internships with students to come in and learn what we do, and as a result of that, some of them decide to go into engineering and other fields. Career Day, we like to participate in career days. We also offer seminars for those who are interested in construction, or engineering, or so of the sort. We also provide seminars concerning entrepreneurship. I always encourage folks to, once you get the expertise, get enough experience, then go in business. We live in a capitalistic society, so it's important that all of us be represented throughout. And I think my 7 minutes is up. If there are any questions, you can raise them right now. Okay. All right. If there are none, again, we're very thankful for Ms. McFadden providing the invitation. We thank you for what you do as a school board. It's a very important thing. Nothing is more important than our children. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Spells. Will you mind to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty, justice for all. Thank you.
Mr. Spells, I just want to say thank you for all you do, and it's great seeing you over here. It's so nice to see the two of you, so thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Spells and family. Moving on to item 6, the consent agenda. May I have a motion?
Madam Chair,
Mrs. Washington.
I move to approve the consent agenda for, today is not the 8th.
May 9th.
For May 9th. I'm sorry, I was reading, it says the 8th. To approve the consent agenda for May 9th for the regular board meeting.
Is there a second?
Second.
The motion has been made by Mrs. Washington and seconded by Mr. Trapp to approve the consent agenda. Is there any discussion? There's no discussion. The second was Mr. Trapp. And the motion is correct. Board members, please vote. And the vote is 7 yes, 0 no. The motion carries. Item 7, public participation. It is my understanding that nobody has signed up today. So we will move on to item 8, voting on executive session items. Item 8.1, student admission request into the adult district education program.
Madam Chair,
Mrs. Porter.
I move to approve the student admission request into the district's adult education program for students numbers 1 through 4.
Is there a second?
Second.
The motion has been made by Mrs. Porter and seconded by Dr. Scott to approve students 1 through 4 into adult education. Board, is there any discussion? There's no discussion. Board members, please vote. And the vote is 7 yes, 0 no. The motion carries. Item 8.2, student appeals.
Madam Chair,
Mrs. McFadden.
I move that we deny the appeal and uphold administration's recommendation for student number 1.
Is there a second?
Second.
The motion has been made by Mrs. McFadden and seconded by Mrs. Porter to deny the student appeal. Is there any discussion? There's no discussion. Board members, please vote. And the vote is 7 yes, 0 no. The motion carries. Student number 2,
Madam Chair,
Mrs. McFadden.
I move that we deny the student's appeal and uphold administration's recommendation
For student number 2.
for student number 2.
Thank you, Mrs. McFadden. Is there a second?
I second.
The motion has been made by Mrs. McFadden and seconded by Mrs. Porter to deny the appeal for student number 2. Board, is there any discussion? There's no discussion. And the motion is correct. Board members, please vote. And the vote is 7 yes, 0 no. The motion carries. Student number 3,
Madam Chair,
Mrs. McFadden.
I move that we deny the student appeal and uphold administration's recommendation
For student number 3.
for student number 3.
Thank you, Mrs. McFadden. Is there a second?
Second.
The motion has been made by Mrs. McFadden and seconded by Mrs. Porter to deny the student appeal for student number 3. Board, is there any discussion? There's no discussion. Board members, please vote. And the vote is 7 yes, 0 no. The motion carries. Student number 4,
Madam Chair,
Mrs. McFadden.
I move that we deny the appeal for student number 3 and uphold administration's recommendation.
I believe student number 4.
Student number 4. Let me start.
Thank you.
Madam Chair,
Thank you, Mrs. McFadden. Is there a second? The motion has been made by Mrs. McFadden and seconded by Mr. Trapp to deny the appeal and uphold administration's recommendation for student number 4. Is there any discussion? There's no discussion. Board members, please vote. And the vote is 7 yes, 0 no. The motion carries. Student number 5,
Madam Chair,
Mrs. McFadden.
I move that we deny the appeal and uphold administrative recommendation for student number 5.
Is there a second?
Second.
The motion has been made by Mrs. McFadden and seconded by Mrs. Porter to deny the appeal for student number 5 and uphold the district's recommendation. Is there any discussion? There's no discussion. Board members, please vote. And the motion carries 7 yes, 0 no. So the motion carries. Moving on to item 8.3, breach of contracts. May I have a motion?
Madam Chair,
Mrs. Washington.
for employee number 1, I move that we direct administration to make a formal complaint to the State Board of Education regarding the professional employee who breached her contract.
Is there a second?
Second.
The motion has been made by Mrs. Washington and seconded by Dr. Scott to report the employee number 1 to the Department of Education for a breach of contract. Is there any discussion? There is no discussion. Is the motion correct? Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Thank you. Board members, please vote. And the vote is 7 yes, 0 no. The motion carries. Employee number 2.
I move that we direct administration not to make a formal complaint to the State Board regarding employee number 2.
Is there a second?
Second.
The motion has been made by Mrs. Washington and seconded by Dr. Scott not to report employee number 2 to the Department of Education. Is there any discussion? There is no discussion. Is the motion correct? Board members, please vote. And the vote is 6 yes, 1 no. The motion carries. Employee number 3.
I move that we direct administration not to make a formal complaint against employee number 3.
Is there a second?
Second.
The motion has been made by Mrs. Washington and seconded by Mrs. Porter not to report employee number 3 to the Department of Education. Is there any discussion? And the motion is correct? Yes. Okay, board members, please vote. And the vote is 6 yes, 1 no. The motion carries. Employee number 4.
For employee number 4, I move that we direct administration to make a formal complaint to the State Board.
Is there a second?
Second.
So the motion has been made by Mrs. Washington and seconded by Dr. Scott for the administration to recommend a breach of contract to the Department of Education for employee number 4. Is there any discussion? There's no discussion. And the motion is correct. Board members, please vote. And there are 5 yes, 2 no's. The motion carries. Moving on to item 8.4, employment recommendations and certified releases.
Madam Chair,
Mrs. Nash.
I move that we approve the employment recommendations and certified releases.
Is there a second?
Second.
The motion has been made by Mrs. Nash and seconded by Dr. Scott to approve the employment recommendations and certified releases. Is there any discussion? There's no discussion. Board members, please vote. And the vote is 7 yes, 0 no. The motion carries. Item 8.5, a contractual matter regarding the leasing and purchase of properties. Is there a motion? I will make a motion. I move the board direct administration to proceed with due diligence on property number 2. Is there a second? Second. The motion has been made by Mrs. Agostini and seconded by Mr. Trapp. Is there any discussion?
Madam Chair,
Yes, Dr. Scott.
thank you. I would not be supporting this. I think, as I have shared before, we're in the process of getting ready to get a new superintendent in the next month and a half. And it just really disturbs my soul when we keep bringing major projects and purchases before the board to make major decisions. I truly believe that if we want to show more cohesiveness and collaboration, this is something that should be discussed when we get a new superintendent in. You know, it just kind of reminds me of a previous board where you try to bring everything before the new person gets in and vote on things, and that person has no input. So because of that, I will not be supporting this tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Scott. Any other board members have any comments? I will just make the comment that this is not to be a major purchase. We are just directing administration to do due diligence on a property. And the motion is correct. Board members, please vote. And the vote is 6 yes, 1 no. The motion carries. Moving on to item 9, unfinished business action requested. 9.1, the revision of policy BEDB, board agenda. Do I have a motion?
Madam Chair,
Mr. Trapp.
I move that we approve the revisions to policy BEDB, board agenda.
Is there a second? The motion has been made by Mr. Trapp and seconded by Mrs. McFadden to approve the revisions for policy BEDB. Is there any discussion?
Madam Chair.
Dr. Scott.
Yes. The only thing here is when you go back, I thought they did not make a few changes that we talked about, and that's in the first paragraph when we stated that the board chairman would develop a schedule whereby each board member is extended the opportunity to attend at least 3 agenda meetings, and we changed that you can attend as many as you like as long as there is no quorum. And that was not changed, but that's what was shared at the last meeting.
Mrs. Gregory, do you have a comment on that? I think that Dr. Franklin left you with some notes.
She did. She left me notes. If there wasn't consensus, she said it was left as it was. Or that's
So
what my notes
would you
say.
like to would you like to amend the policy then to reflect, and we'll get a vote on that?
Sure, I thought we had consensus before, but I don't mind doing that.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll just go back and make a motion with the first paragraph, that the board chairman will not develop a schedule, but board members will have the opportunity to attend meetings as long as there is no quorum.
Okay, if this is possible, could we strike a sentence and rewrite the sentence?
Yes.
Okay, that's what and so can you tell us what sentence to strike? Because we don't need to say the board will not develop, just say, strike that sentence and give
Well,
us
we
the
can
sentence
just,
that you're going to.
we can strike the entire second, third, and fourth line in there and just leave it as one or more additional board members may attend each agenda-setting meeting as long as there is no quorum. And we can just leave it like that. And where it starts with the board chairman, from that point until the end of that paragraph,
Okay.
we could delete.
So you're going to add, as after one additional board member may attend each setting meeting as long as there's no quorum, and then
Yes.
strike the rest.
Yes.
Madam Chair?
Is there a second?
Second.
So the primary amendment has been made by Dr. Scott and seconded by, Mrs. McFadden. Is there any discussion?
Yes, ma'am.
Mrs. McFadden?
I also remember Ms. Porter stating that on Part 2, that very last sentence, upon the receipt of written requests for the same agenda item from 3 board members within a fiscal year, the item will be added to future agenda. We should mark that completely out as well.
All right, let's
said
take
the
care of this
opposite.
first, and then we can go to that.
That's not what I said.
Okay? So let's take care of this, and then let's hear what she has to say.
I was
Let's
pointing
vote on
out that you had issued with that.
The primary amendment offered by Dr. Scott was to add at the end of the second sentence, as long as there is no quorum, and delete the third sentence. Are we good over there? Do we need to take a hand vote then? Okay, we're not approving. Oh. Dr. Scott, on your, okay, so
That's correct.
I know, but the problem is she's saying that she's approving policy BEDB. What we're working on right now is just the primary amendment. We're not approving the policy. We're amending the policy.
Madam Chair? That's how it's stated in the original on the agenda. I move that we approve the revisions of policy BEDB.
Yeah, correct, but that's the main motion.
Right.
Okay, she has made a primary amendment to it. We've got to vote on the primary amendment that she's made before we go back to voting on the main
Okay.
motion.
Okay.
So that has them tied in together when they should be separated.
I see.
So basically what it should say is, I move to amend the policy, well, we don't even need to say that. I move to amend the policy to add, after the second sentence, as long as there is no quorum, period, and then strike the third sentence. Third and fourth sentence. Oh, no, there are only 3 sentences. But that's the fourth line. Okay, you said sentence. But actually, you've also added one or more at the very beginning. You've got to put, when you're adding for the second sentence, one or more, you've got to add the or more after one.
Put an S on number, members.
Put an S on members. Do you want to go take that over to her and show? Yeah. Dr. Scott, please confirm that is correct. Okay, board members, we are now voting on the primary amendment. Please vote. So the vote is 6 yes, 1 no. The motion carries. Board members, the main motion is still on the floor to approve the agenda. It will now include that primary amendment. Is there further discussion?
Yes, ma'am.
Mrs. McFadden?
So I won't say that Nikki said it this time. I'll say it for myself.
Could you
But-
speak a little louder? I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time hearing you.
There was also a discussion about the last sentence in number 2, upon the receipt of written requests from the same agenda item from 3 board members within a fiscal year, the item will be added to a future agenda. There was discussion that we should mark that out because it would take basically 3 times for someone to get something on the agenda. So I would like to move that we strike out that very last sentence in part 2.
Is there a second? Mrs. McFadden has made a motion for on item number 2 to strike the last sentence, which says, upon the receipt of written request for the same agenda item from 3 board members within a fiscal year, the item will be added to a future agenda. Is there a second?
I'll second.
So the motion has been made by Mrs. McFadden and seconded by Mr. Trapp. Board, is there any discussion?
Madam Chair?
Mrs. Porter?
Okay, so I wanted to share because I'm thinking the reasoning, there may be a misunderstanding in the reasoning that was stated. So the point of it in having 3 board members in the year is not that it's going to take so much. It is that 3 members is a minority. So, for example, if there's something that you want to discuss and you don't have the majority of the board in agreement, but you want to discuss something that's important to you or a minority of your constituents, that it's important to some, and you want it to be something that's brought to the board, all you need is 3. You don't have to have more than 3 members to agree with you to bring it to discussion. So you don't have to have a majority of the board to bring something forward. And that is just to ensure that all members feel like there's a way to bring something on the agenda, and it's not a situation where 4 members can come together and make sure that there's certain things that could never be put on the agenda. And all you need is 3 people to state that this is something that we want to discuss at some point.
Let me clarify. So you're actually in support of leaving the language as is?
Absolutely. That's
Okay.
why I said,
Okay.
I did not say that.
Okay. All right. Okay.
And the reason why I brought it up last time was because in many years past, I had seen that play out, where I felt like there were things that people wanted to have discussed, and it was brought up many, many times at the end of meetings, and it was never placed on the agenda, and it caused friction. And so I felt like if that ever happened again, it would be a way that you could prevent divisiveness amongst a board of 7.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Porter. Any further discussion?
Yes, ma'am. That's why I feel like even if there's not 3 people, if there's 1 voice, that 1 voice should count. That's why I make the motion that it doesn't need 3 board members. If you just want to put it on the agenda, then 1 voice is enough. But if you're saying 3, then that is the same thing that we had last time, that you were talking about, that you pointed out at the last meeting, that a couple of board members had went through. If we have to have 3. Yes, ma'am.
I think in the past 3, you couldn't get it on the agenda. So you're saying 1. So basically, any of us can say we want it on the agenda and it can pop on. The only problem with that is then we need to put something in place with prioritizing it, because you have the issue that we had in the very beginning of this year, where we felt like all of us were placing 10, 15 things that we wanted, and then we were all saying, how come it's not appearing on the agenda? Or how did these 7 things get picked? And no one understood. And it was because all 7 of us had 10 different items.
I understand and I agree. However, I believe that all of us have a different purpose on this board. And like I've said in the past, I may have something or you may have something that someone else hasn't thought of. And if we put it on the agenda, there might provoke conversation and discussion. So I agree that, we should prioritize, and we should be in a position where we're saying, well, you know what, mine's not really that important. Let someone else go ahead, but I still want mine on the calendar somewhere within the fiscal year.
So where's that in here?
That's just the thought. We don't have to write it down. I think that in practice that we could do that. We could just say, well, mine's not that important. I had a slate that I picked last week that I wanted on the agenda this week, but I sent the email and said it's not really that important. We can wait on that for a board workshop. And I think that if we start doing that and say, well, mine can wait, I think yours is pressing, I think we can do that and just strike that last one. But I'm amenable to the board, but I would just like to make a motion that we strike that last sentence so we don't need 3 people.
Okay, can we call the vote on this? Okay, we'll call the vote. Mrs. McFadden, the motion is correct? Okay. So the vote is 2 yes, 5 no, so the motion fails. So now we go back to the main motion with the approved primary amendment from Dr. Scott. Is there any additional discussion? Okay, we will vote on the main motion to approve the agenda, or policy BEDB, that includes the primary amendment from Dr. Scott. And the vote is 7 yes, 0 no. The motion carries. Item 9.2, proposal policy BBBD. Is there a motion?
Madam Chair,
Mrs. Washington,
I move that we approve policy BBBD, board member removal from office.
is there a second?
Second.
The motion has been made by Mrs. Washington and seconded by Mrs. Porter to approve policy BBBD. Is there any discussion?
Madam Chair,
Yes, Dr. Scott.
my only discussion would be that policy BBBD is a policy that is a state policy that the governor has put into place, and I will continue to say this. Why are we adopting a policy that's already a state policy? So are we going to go back and adopt all the other policies? It just doesn't make sense to me, and that's my personal opinion. But I will go with the will of the board. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Scott. Any other discussion?
Madam Chair,
Mr. Trapp.
if I may add, and I actually agree with Dr. Scott, but she did pose a question. And the South Carolina School Board Association, if I'm correct, they did recommend this. Again, I think it's not necessary, but that is how it ended up on here. It was recommended by the state.
Thank you, Mr. Trapp. Any additional comments? I'm just going to leave with most of our policies, many of them are based off of state statute. And I know a couple of years ago I was curious how to remove a board member, if it was even possible. So I'm glad that, for our constituents and as a board member, we have this in our policy book so that we have an easy referral to it. Now I'll call the vote. And the vote is 6 yes, 1 no. The motion carries. Item 10, unfinished business, no action requested. Proposal, policy BID, board member compensation and expenses. Mrs. Gregory.
For this one, the only notes that I have are the reimbursement is at the same standard as employees in paragraph 4, where it says the district will reimburse board members for all reasonable and necessary expenses incurred. And also, this policy will become effective January 1st, 2022. We know that we need to come back and strike that.
It's my opinion just to strike it, because generally our policies go into effect immediately, so I
So
think
we
there's no
just-
need, yeah. Any other discussion?
Madam Chair,
Yes, Dr. Scott.
I thought we added a time from 7 to 10 days based on the IG report that had given us
Again,
a time frame.
my notes say to address that, no consensus, that we did not have a consensus the last time in the advancement for the 5 to 7 business days.
And
No, I think it was 7 to 10.
That's what the IG put in his report. However, I think our IG committee, Mrs. Washington, and correct me if I'm wrong, wanted to go in alignment with what the finance department had submitted, because I believe it's 2 weeks or something, and maybe Dr. Miley can address that.
No, I think we can address it.
No,
because-
I'd like just him to clarify
Right.
what the time frame is in what he has stated, and that was, I believe, what
Right,
Mrs.
but
Washington, let's just hear the timeline.
Well, no,
We'll have the
we-
discussion.
I get that, but
Yeah.
what I'm saying is, I know what the timeline says, but I know how long it takes us to get reimbursed. And the timeline has said, according to Dr. Miley, and he can correct me once he gets up there, he said they follow the pay period, which is 2 weeks, but that's incorrect, because when we submit our paperwork, it takes 3, 4, and even in some instances, some people, it's taken 5 weeks to get their reimbursement. Because when you look at the timeline, there's a calendar that they use. So for an example, and I'm just creating these days, it may say that if you don't get your reimbursement in by the 10th, then you don't get paid until the 15th of the next month if you don't get it in by this day. So sometimes when we go on these conferences and workshops, we may return back the day after that date, which means now we're going into 4 weeks of being able to get reimbursed. So it will be very difficult following the timeline that they say, because they say 2 weeks, but it depends on the conference date that it could extend longer than that period. And some of the new people don't know that, because they haven't been here long enough to know that there's a cutoff date when you have to return things. So sometimes it does take 4 weeks or 5 weeks to get reimbursed. And if I'm spending $800 or $1,000, I don't want someone having me to wait 4 weeks to get my money back. And the same thing with teachers. That's why many teachers have already shared that some of them don't go to workshops and conferences, because it takes too long for them to get reimbursed, and they're already not making enough money, so how can they afford to do that? But I'll defer to Dr. Miley.
Dr. Miley.
Thank you. We try to get everyone reimbursed as quickly as we can. There are times, we do pay twice a month. We run our AP checks twice a month. You have the information, even our vendors, when we get invoices, they need to have their invoices in at X time in order to get paid the next check run. Reimbursement for travel expenses are the same thing. Now, there are times, and this may have affected just about everybody here and anybody that's ever traveled, when we get this documentation in, that's not when the clock really starts. It's when the documentation is completed. And that there are times when, for instance, we'll get the documentation, you've submitted it, but there's something missing from that documentation, and we need to get that documentation in order to get you paid correctly. And so there are times that it does take longer to do that. But once we have all the documentation, we put it into the check run, and it's usually within 2 weeks. That sometimes varies, sometimes it's faster than that. But most of the travel, and this is what we try to do with all of our personnel and all of our staff, is we try to pay most of the expenses up front through the district. Hotel, airline transportation, registration, most of the big ticket items, we encourage our employees, let us put those on district credit cards and we'll pay for those, and then there's very little cost to the individual traveling, and then we reimburse them as fast as we can. But there are times when it does take longer. One of my concerns with putting a different schedule than our regular AP check runs is because, not that this would happen, but we could have 7 people coming in for 7 different days. submitting a request, and then that person has to get their check in 7 days, then the next person, we have to make another check run the next day, and then we have, in essence, we're doing 7 special check runs because of the 7-day limit in terms of when the submission is made. But we try to do it the best we can. We usually get it out as fast as we can if the documentation is correct in the first submission. Does that help?
Thank you, Dr. Miley. Any questions of Dr. Miley? So, Dr. Scott, do you want to make an amendment to the policy then?
No.
All right, any further discussion? No further discussion. We'll move on to, thank you, Dr. Miley, item 10.2, the legislative update.
Good evening. On the legislative update tonight, we have Mr. Patrick Kelly with us. Mr. Kelly is a Blythewood High School teacher. Happy Teacher Appreciation Day to you. And also the other hat he wears, he is the Director of Government Affairs for the PSTA, the Palmetto State Teachers Association. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, and thank you, board members, for having me tonight and for what you guys are doing each and every day for teachers and students and families in Richland, too. I will try to be brief and concise with the overview of the wrap-up of a legislative session. They are literally, the Senate's still in session right now, the House is in a committee meeting, and Thursday, in theory, is the last day of the session, but the reality is they may end up going a little longer than that. But I'm going to try to hit just a couple of high-level key areas in education, just for your awareness. The first one of which is the state budget, which obviously has a direct intersection with your work. Where the budget is, and this is actually, the numbers are the same, but there's an update to this. So where they are in the process right now is today the House of Representatives brought their second version of the budget to the floor at like 2 o'clock this afternoon. And that is their second pass at the budget after the Senate has already gotten it. None of the core education numbers were changed in that. There were 2 education provisos or amendments that were added to the second pass through the House budget. The first one deals with Read to Succeed certification courses. It would exempt middle and high teachers from having to take those courses in the coming year unless they're English or special ed teachers. The second proviso would, in effect, allow the high school league to come up with different rules or regulations for how charter schools and private schools are classified. And the House did adopt that. But now it goes back to the Senate. The Senate, as you have been debating, non-concurred with the House budget, which they always do. That pushes the budget to conference committee. So it will now get to conference committee. It should be on time for signature into law by the governor by the end of the fiscal year on June 30th. If not by the end of this month, the General Assembly has passed a continuing resolution as a fail-safe, just in case, goodness forbid, they don't get the bill to the governor by June 30th. The state would continue to operate at the same funding levels the current year. But given that the second House budget has now been passed by the House, the Senate has non-concurred, and now they can start the conference committee process, they should be on track to get that done within the next couple of weeks. And the key numbers you can see up there, the big one being the $260 million increase to the state aid to classrooms program. That is an increase for every district. I have not seen a spreadsheet that shows what each district gets yet, but it would be an increase for every district. The $2,500 increase to salary schedule, Richland 2 already pays beyond that. So what that means is that the state budget will not require that Richland 2 increase teacher salaries or anyone that is paid according to the statewide minimum salary schedule, but the state is giving Richland 2 additional money. And I will not editorialize here. I'm just going to say what I heard Speaker of the House Smith say to a group of teachers this morning in the House. Their expectation is that state aid to classrooms is used primarily around salary issues. But that is at the discretion of the board because it is flexible funding because you already pay beyond the state minimum. And then the other items that you see up there are pretty self-explanatory. So that's the budget. Second area is school choice has been a huge area of priority for the General Assembly this year as they have dealt with 3 different bills that deal with some version of school choice. Two of them are currently in the legislative process, and one of them has been signed into law by the governor. The first, H. 3843, has passed the House. It is sitting in the Senate Education Committee, likely to get attention next year because this is year one of a 2-year term, so any bill that doesn't get passed by 5 o'clock this Thursday picks up in the exact same status in January of 2024. That bill wouldn't have a deep impact on Richland 2 because Richland 2 has been a leader in open enrollment policies in this state for decades. The only thing that, and again, it wouldn't really impact Richland 2 because of our existing policies, it would require every district to offer inter-district choice, or intra. I always use the wrong term in class with my students on the Commerce Clause and they call me out. So intra, within a district like we already have, that would be required of every district, no change for us. And the bill even goes out of its way to say that a district would not have to change existing policies. The other thing it would require is for districts to have an inter-district option. So if a child in Fairfield wanted to come to Richland 2 would have to make that available with two important caveats. Number one, only if Richland 2 made the determination that there was enrollment space, so that it is fully at the discretion of the district to say, we're full, no space in the inn. If there is space, the district has the discretion to charge an out-of-district cost of attendance because the out-of-district student's family doesn't pay local property tax. So that bill has passed the House. It's sitting in the Senate. S. 285 has passed the Senate. It is sitting in the House at a House subcommittee meeting or hearing last Thursday. It did not advance, so it will start in House subcommittee next year. It is a scholarship account bill that would allow individuals or businesses to donate to a scholarship granting foundation, and the parameters for that are outlined in the bill. And the individual or business that donates to the scholarship granting foundation would get a 1-to-1 credit on their state income tax return. It is non-refundable, so you're not going to get money back from the state if you give $500,000. But if you have a $2,000 income tax liability or bill from the state, you could have all of that relaxed by giving $2,000 to the scholarship granting entity instead. And sometimes there's a misunderstanding that people are like, oh, you're going to make money. No, you're just deciding the bill's either going into the state treasury or it's going into the scholarship fund. But either way, you're paying $2,000. It breaks into 4 different categories of students. So students could receive those scholarships to go to a private school. They could receive those scholarships to go to a homeschool situation, or they could actually use them for out-of-district cost of attendance to a non-zoned public school as well. And then S39, the one at the bottom, is the one that's been in the headlines over the last week because Governor McMaster signed it into law last week. It is an education scholarship account bill that is not a voucher bill. It's a little different. A voucher bill is a direct appropriation from the state to a private school. What this bill would do is make eligible students eligible to apply for a education scholarship account that would be valued at $6,000. If they are able to get it, because there's a limited number of students each year that can get it, if a family receives that ESA, they could use it on about 17 different allowable education expenses. Yes, it could be private school tuition. It could also be out-of-cost attendance cost at a non-zoned public school. It could be tutors. It could be computer equipment. It could be curriculum. There's a wide range of uses, and that is now law in South Carolina. So that will not go into effect in the coming year. There's about $2 million in the state budget for next year to set up the infrastructure at the State Department of Education for the online payment portal and the application process. Families would be eligible to apply for this starting in the 24-25 school year. In year 1, there will be 5,000 students eligible, and they would have to be at Medicaid eligibility or below for family income. In year 2, in 25-26, it expands to 10,000 students, and in year 3, it expands to 15,000 students, and the income cap raises to 400% of poverty. So for a family of 4, that's roughly $120,000. And then the bill stops at 15,000. Of course, the General Assembly could raise it if they wanted to. In your packet, that does not show up at all worth a dime on the screen because of little bitty font, but I gave you a graphic just to help you navigate those 3 bills. And again, the key is the first 2 are not law at this point, but they have passed one chamber or the other. S39 is the law of the land in South Carolina now. So if anyone has any questions, I'll pause on that just because that's gotten so much attention, and now that S39 is law, you can talk about it with finality instead of what ifs. I don't know if anyone has any
questions, board members?
Okay. Yeah, so moving past school choice. The Senate this evening may take up the Transparency and Integrity in Education Act. And they're going to be in session late tonight. If they don't get to it tonight, they may tomorrow. This bill has passed the House. It has passed the Senate Education Committee. It has been on the Senate calendar for about 3 weeks. They started debate on it last Tuesday. Then they cycled on to other things on their calendar, and they just haven't gotten back because their calendar's, as of today, 36 pages long of bills that they are trying to pass before Thursday at 5 o'clock. But what this bill does is two things, really. It codifies an existing proviso in the state budget that has existed since 2021 that is entitled the Partisanship Curriculum Proviso that forbids instruction or training in 8 different areas, that one race is inherently superior to another, that an individual is inherently oppressive because of their race, gender, or national origin. That has been in state law for 2 years now, 2 full years. This act would codify that into permanent law instead of a 1 year, because a budget proviso has to get reapproved every year. With one difference, the proviso says that instruction should not cause an individual to feel discomfort, anguish, or psychological distress on account of race, sex, gender, national origin, ethnicity. The bill doesn't include that language because of a lot of testimony that was received about how do you learn about the Holocaust without discomfort, or Jim Crow without discomfort. And the senators have been very clear that they want a full teaching of history, and so that portion of the proviso does not exist in this bill. Beyond that, the bill sets up 2 additional things. It protects certain areas of instruction, and it sets up a process for individuals to raise concerns about instruction or training that they feel may run afoul of the prohibitions in this act. And that's actually really important to note, because currently the budget proviso says thou shalt not do these things, but it doesn't say what happens if you do those things. There's no enforcement mechanism, which leads to lawsuits against school districts and things of that nature, because there is no clarity. In this bill, only a parent, a student, or a district employee would be eligible to file a complaint of a violation of the Transparency Act. If one of those 3 do, there is a very clearly articulated complaint process laid out in the bill, including the requirement that the individual with the complaint has made a good faith effort to talk to the teacher or school level principal that's involved in the situation. So you've got to have dialogue before you file a complaint. Then the complaint would come to the district for adjudication. If whichever party didn't like the district's adjudication of the issue, it would go to the state board and be handled by the state board's process. So I gave you a graphic for that as well. I know it's, again, small up on the screen, but to try to give you, it's a 12-page bill, so I'm just trying to give you kind of some snapshots on it. The one thing that I would emphasize are those 2 red cells down at the bottom, because that's gotten a lot of press, and I want to make sure that you are clear that the Senate version removed some components that the House had inserted. And there are those 2 red cells. The first would have allowed any parent in any state in this country to sue any school district for any reason for injunctive relief from any instructional practice. The Senate Education Committee said, we're not doing that, and they removed it. The House bill also would have required a teacher, prior to teaching new instructional content, and it didn't define what that is, so it didn't say, does that mean textbook, newspaper article? It didn't define it. But as a teacher, I could not teach anything new unless I had posted it 3 days prior. It didn't say where to post it, so that was also kind of a gap in the bill. But the senators said that would basically, like when the Chinese spy balloon floated over South Carolina a few months ago. My students, I teach AP government, they had some questions the next day. Senators had concern that I would have had to have looked at my students and said, get back to me in 3 days, which is not exactly the best instructional approach. And so they have removed that. If the Senate does pass the bill, it will go to conference committee because the Senate has now amended the bill. But who knows what the Senate's going to do in the next 48 hours. Next topic is teacher recruitment and retention. For your awareness, the budget this year created a statewide teacher recruitment, retention, and advancement task force that is comprised of legislators, higher education officials, school board members, administrators, 4 current teachers, of which I'm one, and a pre-service teacher. A teaching fellow at Clemson University is actually on the task force, and she's the brightest one of the entire bunch. But that report from that task force will be released no later than May 31st, and it has a bevy of recommendations for the state on how to address the educator shortages in this state. And even though it's called the Teacher Recruitment Task Force, it is going to address the fact we have educator shortages in this state. It's not just classroom teachers, it's nurses, it's speech pathologists. It's, I mean, you guys know this, you look at the job listings. So it tries to take a holistic approach to educators, and I would certainly encourage you when that report comes out to look at it, because there will be some I think, good information in there. I'm a little partial. Current legislative actions, just 3 to put on your radar. The Senate has now passed H 3908 unanimously. This bill has passed both the South Carolina House and Senate unanimously at every step of the legislative process. It may be the only substantive bill this session that has done that. It would extend the same paid parental leave policy to educators and to district employees that were extended to state employees last year. So that's 6 weeks for the birth of a child or the adoption of a child. It is 2 weeks for the non-birthing, so for dad, or 2 weeks for the secondary parent in adoption. So if my wife and I adopt, we would have to decide who's primary, who's secondary. One would get 6, one would get 2, and then 2 weeks for a foster placement. And you get 1 benefit during a 12-year period. So that should make it to the governor's desk this week. It just needs to go back to the House so they can agree to the amendments made by the Senate, which they're going to do. They were technical. H 4280 will not become law this year, but it has been passed unanimously by the House. A couple things about it. It will create a permanent educator certificate. Right now, teachers, any certified educator has to renew their certificate every 5 years by submitting 120 hours of documentation to the State Department. This bill would say once you have achieved the professional level in your certificate, which is usually in year 3, you're done. Now, you still have to do any required professional training from the district. It does not exempt someone out of that. They're just exempt from the paperwork submission. The bill would also provide a 10-day window where an educator could withdraw their contract without penalty. Tomorrow is contract signing day. So under this bill, if Richland 2 posted their salary schedule June 10th, then a teacher would have from June 10th to June 20th to withdraw their contract without any action taken against their certificate, with the rationale there being that educators sign contracts before they know what their salary is, and I don't really know other professions that do that. And then finally, the bill would address breach of contract. It would reduce the maximum penalty for a breach from 12 months to 6 months. It would give the state board additional discretion on whether or not to actually act on a recommendation of breach, and it would require a district to notify or to forward the recommendation to the state board within 30 days of the breach in order for it to be acted on by the state board. So that bill, unanimous through the House, it will be sitting in Senate Education. And then Read to Succeed, I can be real quick on. It's not becoming law this year. The Senate passed a version that would have just addressed the training requirements under Read to Succeed for teachers. The House then took that 2 weeks ago and turned it into a fundamental overhaul of the entire Read to Succeed legislation. So it went from a 3-paragraph bill to a 13-page bill. And the Senate is not going to take that up before they leave for the year. So, but that's going to very much be on their radar come January 2024. So that is something definitely to keep an eye on, because when I say comprehensive overview of Read to Succeed, I mean it. It touches everything from what you can teach to who is giving interventions to how much intervention time to who's eligible for reading camp. It is a wholesale overhaul of Read to Succeed. So that's something to definitely keep on your radar. And then the final one I'm not going to dig in on much because I saw what's coming next on your agenda with school safety, but this has been a focus at the General Assembly as well. as it should be. H 3360 passed out of the Senate Judiciary Committee today, which gives it should make it out of the Senate. Who knows what they do in the next 48 hours, but it should make it out of the Senate. That simply authorizes SLED to establish a training facility at an old elementary school in Lexington County, where they can run ongoing training for local law enforcement and for school administrators, so they don't have to come to districts like Richland 2 and say, can you tell us when the school is open for training? And you say, it's not open. This gives them a permanent school-based, school-like facility for training, and there's $3.5 million in the state budget in both the House and Senate version to get that up and running. There's also $20 million in the budget for school safety facility upgrades. So I put this on your radar because I know what's coming, and this is next on your agenda. The $20 million is in both the House and the Senate version of the budget, so it is going to, unless Governor McMaster line item vetoes it, which I don't envision him line item vetoing this line, there will be a $20 million grant available from the state for districts to apply to for permanent facility upgrades. So it is not for recurring costs. You couldn't pay for like a software program that has an annual license per student out of this money. But for anything that is a hard facility upgrade that is a one-time purchase, districts will be able to apply for that money, and the State Department will develop application process and criteria for awarding that money. And then there's $27.3 million additional dollars in the budget for SROs, but of course in Richland 2, our board has consistently gone above and beyond in making sure that Richland 2 has those law enforcement professionals on campus. That is still not true on every school campus in South Carolina, though, but it's not because of the money, it's because we can't find the law enforcement officers. So that's kind of a snapshot of where we are in year 1 of 2. As of today, there were only 22 bills that had made it to the governor's desk for the whole session, but that is typical because they have a 2-year term. Now, this week, they'll probably pass 30 more, but this is kind of a midpoint. So think of it as the midterm for the General Assembly, but there's still a lot more work to come. So I'd be happy to answer any questions that anyone may have.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Board members' questions. Dr. Scott.
Mr. Kelly, thank you so much for that. I just want to go back to Bill H. 4280.
Yes, ma'am.
When will that bill be signed? Did they give any guidelines?
So it's passed the House. It is now in the Senate. The Senate has not given it any committee action. So earliest timeline on that would be, let's say the Senate comes right out of the gate in January 2024. They could probably have it to the governor's desk by early February.
Okay.
But the bill, I'd have to go back. The bill's probably going to need an amendment made to it anyway, because if I'm remembering correctly, it goes into effect something 2023. They'll have to amend the language because the bill didn't get passed this year. Right. Okay. But earliest it would get to the governor would be late January, early February 2024.
Any other questions, comments? I'm just going to take a brief moment to share with everyone what a great guy we have speaking to us. I got an email from a professor at Arizona State University who saw, and this just happened this week, who saw Mr. Kelly on PBS and was very complimentary of him, and I forwarded the email so that the two could connect. But you're global, you're famous, so thank you for everything, at least national.
I'm PBS famous, which I didn't know was a thing until this week. But
so thank you so much, Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, and thank you for all that you do.
Okay. Item 11, new business, no action requested. 11.1, third quarter financial report.
Yes, Dr. Harry Miley is coming forward, our Senior Chief for Finance and Operations, and he is going to also introduce our new Chief Financial Officer.
Yes, thank you. Good evening, everyone, again. It's my great pleasure to introduce Ms. Nancy Williams, Mrs. Nancy Williams, as our new CFO. If you don't know Nancy, she is extremely well qualified, was the CFO of the State Department of Education. I think that's about a, $11 billion, $7 billion budget. She used to round off our levels of budget, but we're happy to have her here, and she's hit the ground running, and she's going to be a great asset to the district. And she may want to say a couple of things. Let her tell you a little bit about herself.
I think you said enough. I just wanted to say just good evening, and I'm excited to be a part of the Richland 2 family. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Dr. Molly, before we start, I want to welcome Ms. Williams, but also to remind the board that tonight's third quarter financial report is just a financial report. Just a reminder that it's not about programs or initiatives, but if you have any questions about programs or initiatives, if you will please send those to us and we will answer those. But again, this is just about the financial report, not a report on programs or initiatives.
And Madam Chair,
Dr.
thank you. If you would let me, I would like to follow up a couple of things about Patrick's presentation that affect our budget. If you would allow me, it's a little out of line in terms of the third quarter, but one of the things is that you saw the $27 million of funding for SROs. That's additional funding statewide. We currently have 37 SROs in the district. 23 of them are paid for in the general fund budget that you approved. That's been for the case for 8 or 10 years, I think. But we also have 14 that are fully funded by the State Department. The first 4 was funded by the State Department of Education, and then they moved that program over to the Department of Public Safety. And we have 14 fully funded, and that's salaries, equipment, cars, everything from the State Department of Public Safety. And we have put in a request, I believe, for 6 more to man the centers, one for here at R2i2 Student Center. And it was encouraging to see the increase at the statewide level. Now, that's statewide, doesn't mean we're going to get all 6, but we're hoping. And they do have, we've asked multiple times about, well, we really would like multiple SROs in these large high schools and large middle schools. But right now, the program, I'm not sure this is their practice, they want to get 1 SRO in every school statewide. And until they do that, they're not paying for additional SROs for more than 1 SRO in one site. But we hope we can get those extra 6. Second, the paid leave. That's a great program. Statewide, the state government already has it. Our concern at the district level is it's a great program, but it is not funded by the state. And so we will be finding funds at the district level to adhere to the state law. That's the same concern we have with the uninterrupted time for teachers. That's a new state law, and it's not funded by the state, so we are facing challenges there. But I wanted to mention that. And also, lastly, the Board of Economic Advisors met today, and they raised the 22-23 budget estimate, the one we're in that ends in 45, 60 days. They raised that estimate by $564 million. And so we've only got it built, the budget's already been passed, and that will just lapse over as surplus. And then they raised next year the 23-24 allocation for our current budget allocations by $240 million, which brings the total for next year about a little over $1 billion recurring dollars and about $4.3 billion of non-recurring. So hopefully the state has the resources, and hopefully they will continue to fund the public education system. But we will be back to you with our budget. I'm going to be updating the budget timeline. We still are wrestling with what it's going to cost in terms of parental leave and the unencumbered time, and we're getting those estimated in terms of our costs, and we will get back to you with that budget estimate, budget process. But in terms of the third quarter, we're tracking right on average, slightly above average than our the last 5 years. Our revenues we've been collecting to date about 78% of the total revenues for the year by the end of the third quarter. Right now, we're tracking a little bit above that. Our expenditures in the last 5 years usually tracks about 65%, practically 2/3, which is 3/4 of the year. And then, but we're currently slightly above that. So our expenditures are basically right in line with our last 5 years. So we feel like we're right on target. We have had, and as we'll see in the next couple of graphs, we've had a much higher increase than anticipated in indirect costs. We get indirect costs from our grants in terms of federal funds, and so that's much higher than we expected. And then the interest income is just almost $1 million plus above what we anticipated because of the interest rates. When we were putting this budget together this time last year, interest rates were about 0, maybe 0.01 or 0.5. And now they're at 5% in March 31. So we're earning substantially higher, 50 times higher interest than we were this time last year. And all that's good unless you're trying to buy a house. Then mortgage rates are higher, et cetera. But our earnings are much higher. These next couple of charts, we've just include these just to remind everybody, especially the public that may not be as familiar as you are. In terms of our total revenue, 64% of our total revenues are from state funding, 35% are from local, and then we have a small smidgen, less than 1% of our total budget, general fund budget, is from federal revenue. Expenditures, we've talked about this multiple times, and the community can see this. Salaries and benefits, that's the big chunk of our budget, 85%. When you look at some of our other contracts, like our property contracts and repairs and maintenance, those are pretty much fixed. Utilities, it's difficult to cut that back if we had to, mainly because we don't want kids going to school cold in the winter and hot in the summer. One of the things I also wanted to mention was that several times we have other districts, or we may have seen other districts, and their salaries and benefits may be higher than ours, maybe almost 90%. And we're a little bit different because one of the things that we do, and other districts have done this as well, but all of our lawn maintenance people are not employees, they're contracted, so they're not in the salaries and benefits section. All of our food service employees are under contracts and not in the salaries and benefits. And then all of our custodial services are in contracts versus salaries and benefits. So if we, for many districts with even the same size budget, they might be at 90 or so, 91%, because those employees are in the salary and benefits rather than the contract and property contracts. And then this is just show you about the third quarter. We usually get about 37%. And again, we're right on track with that. And I think I'd rather just get to the numbers here if we could. In terms of the third quarter revenues, as I said, we're right at 82%. We usually are tracking about 78%, so we're a little above that. But again, if I think this is, I don't know whether I've got a light or not, but if you look up at the, it's about the second line under local income, you see we budgeted $125,000, and so far through the third quarter, we've collected $1.9 million of interest income. Again, that's the hazards of forecasting. We built this budget a year ago when interest rates were relatively flat and almost zero, and now they're 5% over the last 12 months, built up to 5%, and that does make a huge difference, and so that number is much higher. And as you see, our very first line, we had estimated indirect costs about $2 million. It's tracking right on line because we still have another quarter to reach that budgeted estimate. In terms of expenditures, we're right, like I said, we're right on line. Our normal expenditure through the third quarter is about 65%. We're right at 66%. You see that most of those are tracking, and again, most of the largest component of our budget are the salaries and the benefits, and they are, as you see, 64% on salaries and almost 62% in salaries and benefits. Again, those are due to our vacancies that we have and difficulties we've had in filling positions, so our salaries and benefits expenditures are below what we had anticipated and what we had budgeted for. And with that, we also have our EIA, Education Improvement Act Fund. This year, just to FY, they have taken 3 more line item EIA funding sources, collapsed them into other allocations. And as you will see in our budget discussions, as soon as we finish them, we have had to incorporate those line item EIA funding sources into the general fund. It's almost like an expense to us. But you see, we've got about $34 million budgeted. We're tracking pretty much on schedule. We've spent about 26. We've got about $9 million left, and that should carry us through the fourth quarter. Our special revenues, we have a lot of them. The primary largest ones are our ESSER funds. As you see from our ESSER funds, the ESSER 3, line Fund 218, that's our largest ESSER fund. That's the one that is ending September 2024, and that's the one we are anticipating spending a good deal this summer, and we are, now that we're just about finished with ESSER 2, we're reevaluating some of the allocations. As we discussed the last time, in terms of we anticipate the expenditures, we budget them well in advance, we have to make the plan submission to the State Department well in advance, and things change. And so we'll be making some amendments to that ESSER 3 fund to the State Department of Education to make some changes so that we can take advantage of as much of that funding as we can. And with that, the last thing is our school board fund balance. Our balance is a little negative. We've had some larger than anticipated expenditures in the board's budget. We will hopefully be able to, while that department and that budget line is in the negative, obviously with hopefully the other line items that we will not be in the negative, such as salaries and benefits, the district will have plenty of funding to make those, to cover those expenses. But in that department, those expenses have been higher than we anticipated. The largest one, as you can see, is from legal services, and that's a pretty big line item, and well beyond what our normal legal expenses are for a typical fiscal year. And with that, I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Board members, questions?
Madam Chair,
Dr. Scott.
just two questions. The first one, do the schools still receive utility checks? Do they still receive those utility checks?
The schools?
Yes. You know, like if you, help me out, Arthur. Remember back in the days, you guys would get a check for the schools if your electric bill wasn't...
For energy plant.
Yes.
No, we do not do that anymore. We just discontinued that about 6 or 8 years ago.
It's been that long?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay. The second question is, I'm looking at services and supplies. Legal services, that would not have come out of the general fund instead of school board?
Well, it's paid out of the general fund, but this is just a component of the general fund. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So it has nothing to do with the school board budget? It's just...
Well, it is the school board's budget, but we will pay it. I mean, we pay that, and that's just a component of the general fund, and we will pay that out of using general funds. For instance, that will make up the shortage out of the general funds, but it is a general fund account. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
Any other questions? And Dr. Miley, I know that we just had the ESSER fund presentation, but just refresh my memory. We don't get the money. We have to apply for it. We pay for it, and then we send in the receipt.
Our new CFO knows that process much better than I do. But yes, ma'am.
Okay.
We submit the plan, they approve it, then once it's approved, we can spend it. We spend it, hire people, pay salaries or whatever, whether it's can't imagine, I can't even remember all the things, whether it's PPP or whatever it is.
Certain
we pay
ways,
for it.
but then they reimburse us.
With sufficient documentation.
Okay.
Yes, we have to document everything. Some of the different ESSER programs have different documentation and submittal processes, so each one is a little bit different, but yes, we submit documentation that yes, we did pay this for this, and then we get reimbursed. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Any other questions, board members?
Madam Chair?
Yes, Mrs. McFadden.
With the ESSER that we were adjusting, were those adjustments made, or were you going to bring it back to us?
We've made, in terms of all of our ESSER funds, I believe we have made amendments to all of them over the process of the last 4 years. ESSER 3 is the one we need to pay attention to and make some major amendments in order to try to take advantage of them. I mean, if we don't amend them, there won't be anything wrong. It's just that there may be some opportunity. We may just not spend all the money by the deadline, and we want to make sure we can take advantage of that. And so what we'll be going to is the departments that utilize the funds the most and going to them and saying, okay, you may not be spending all the money. You want to do this. Did your department need something else, some other service that you might need? And if so, we'll make that amendment, and hopefully it'll be amended. Yes, ma'am.
So would that be for, like we talked about before, adding the community services portion?
It could be. We haven't made that amendment yet. We have reached out to the State Department in terms of whether that can be done. They said yes. It's not a guarantee that we just say, oh, we want to do this with this community. It would be approved, but they have approved some community partnerships through the ESSER funds.
So basically that process would be that we would try to send that amendment in.
And my suggestion to our team is those people that would use those people that are in contact with the communities for these programs, that's not my expertise. Okay. You tell me, staff, tell me what could help. And then we'll document that and put that in an application and see if it's approved.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And when does that have to be turned in for approval? When's the final deadline?
So final deadline is
September 30th?
September 2024 to spend it all.
Okay.
There's no deadline for an amendment. Okay. We feel like we need to do it within the next 60 days.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am. So that we'll have time to spend it if that amendment is approved.
Okay. Yes, sir. Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, Dr. Miley.
Thank you.
Item 11.2, Safety and Security Committee update.
Okay. All right, we turn this over to Ms. Angela Nash, who is chair of that committee.
Can I get a clicker? Do I have a clicker? All right, well, I just want to go ahead and say I'm so thankful. Our Safety and Security Committee, no problem. Let's see here, and I just hit, how does this go? Oh, is this, okay, okay, got it, easy enough. All right, so first I want to say thank you for everybody that's on the Safety and Security Committee. As you can see here are some of our board members. I don't want to kind of recap everything because we did that in our last 3 meetings, but here are our board members that are there, our parent representatives, our school representative, and our law enforcement representatives. But I don't want to just leave the other people in this room who also helped out and brought input. I asked Ms. Gregory if at any of our meetings there were people that needed to be at those meetings to provide input based on the conversations that we were having, if those people could be included. So thank you all. You guys all know who you are for providing input on that. So I like to call this phase 1, and areas we addressed in phase 1. We had one of our student representative, Kendall Brown. She was here, and she's beginning to talk about mental health, and then our teacher of the year, Mr. Valente Gibson, also talked about the mental health of our staff. So areas 1, we discussed mental health of our students and staff, securing the physical aspect of the building, and then addressing cyber safety, which is something that is a very much needed conversation that we need to have with our young people because it has lasting effects and is affecting our world more now than ever. And then working with our community to create awareness around safety. So some of our recommendations, we'll get just right into it, and we've talked to administration about this, and I know that they're super creative, so they're going to make amazing things happen. But creating PSAs to make students aware of who the counselors are in our school, that was a conversation with our student. She said that she was not aware of all the counselors that were available and felt that that was also the case for students, and that was also the concern of our parent representative, to ensure that we knew who the counselors were, the community partners, and making that readily available. So for number one, administration to create PSAs to make students aware of who the counselors are in our schools. And then number 2 there, administration to ensure family counselors and community partners info is readily available and updated updated every quarter. Next up, we have administration to create PSAs to address behavior and bringing weapons to school and the consequences of those decisions. I think we talked about even involving some of the students as far as like some dramatics, making some really cool things around that are impactful. Next, we have administration to create PSAs to address bringing weapons to school and the consequences of those decisions. I think they did a really great job of the ones that we had with Sheriff Lott was in those, and just kind of continuing along with that. Next up, this had to do with the building. So this is the physical safety of R2 buildings. Administration to complete and or update Richland 2 safety plan to be completed by the last week of the 2022 school year. And then school board to review and adopt policy on metal detectors. Last week in our safety and security meeting, Mr. Anderson came in and did a really great job of letting us know what the cost of that was going to be, and that we knew we were going to have a issue with manpower, but we're working on it. And this is a great time, Mark Claxton, I know you'll love this, for me to plug security subs. If you guys are not aware that you can be a security sub, reach out to Mark Claxton to find out more, because we need security subs. So next, adopt administration's plan to implement metal detectors in high schools and pop-ups in middle schools by first of the school year for the 2023-2024 school year as presented at the May 2nd, 2023 Safety and Security Committee meeting. We know that's just like a target date, but that's the goal, so we're going to shoot high and hopefully get pretty close, I think that's what we discussed. Okay, so next up, and this is on the cyber safety piece. I had the opportunity to go to Blythewood SIC and got to meet the Attorney General's cyber and security education specialist. And she talked about so many things. So we talked about administration to create PSAs to address cyberbullying and cyber safety. One of the other things, and I missed on the point right before as far as security around the building, is for the Safety and Security Committee to go and look at schools who've already safely and just done a really great job of implementing metal detectors and seeing how that all plays out so that we have a better understanding of how the metal detectors work for them to be stationary and there all the time and how they get through. So we can better understand the process and come back and share that with the board as well. So moving on back here to this very last, one of the last points on cyber safety, administration to incorporate assembly for middle and high school students presented by the South Carolina Attorney General's Cybersecurity and Safety Education Specialist as a part of transitioning middle school and high school students. We thought that was a great place to implement that because that's where a lot of times you get into the cell phone usage to a degree that is a high level and things start going that can literally, the cybersecurity specialist said, can follow you for over 10 years. That if you go for a job interview now, it will go back 10 years. And so we really want our students to be aware of that so that they don't have something on their record for 10 years and they go for a job interview and aren't able to get a job for something that they did it as a student. And then lastly here, we've been talking about, and this was like a collective effort from the whole board or the committee, I think this is such a wonderful idea, having a safety and security committee host a Stay Safe for the Summer community cafe event before the 2022-2023 summer vacation. We know we'll have to work fast, but we know there's some community partners who are already willing to come and have conversations with us. But a community cafe with like just treats and drinks, we'll have speakers that will present on gun lock safety, cybersecurity, trafficking, and some summer programs for students. And I think that's going to be a really great way to cap off the summer, basically informing. We would love, Mr. Turquetta, for myself and maybe one of the representatives, parent representatives, to do maybe some PSAs for Parent Square so people will know that that stuff is coming up. But this is something that we really want to do to invite and cap off phase one of just really getting ready for the summer. And hopefully it goes really, really well, and it's something that we can do every summer or even every quarter, depending on how we think that will work out. And that is the conclusion. I try to talk fast.
Thank you, Mrs. Nash. Board members, questions?
Madam Chair?
Oh, Mrs. Washington, then I'll get to Mr. Trapp.
This is a question for administration. Do we know if our schools are, having school-wide assemblies or conversations with students when we have these various events that are happening? I've polled some students myself, and they seem to have a concern that it's always back to business or back to normal. And so I just wanted to know, do we know if our schools are actually having these conversations with our students?
think it varies from school to school, and I see Dr. Vickery nodding, and it depends upon the event. And instead of a large assembly, in many cases, we bring the LSS team and bring additional counselors. And Abby and Abby Cobb and Dr. Vickery are in the back of the room, but they lead that effort because we feel like we need to have the additional counselors and school personnel where students have a free space where they can come talk to a caring adult rather than in a huge assembly where they may not feel comfortable after an event has happened. Dr. Vickery, anything you would add to that? That is our standard operating procedure. We put that into effect no matter what. And again, this way students are able to express their feelings, express themselves, and have a caring adult. But again, that is done automatically if any kind of event happens.
Mrs. Washington, are you set? Okay, Mr. Trapp.
I just wanted to share a conversation I had this week. I was talking to some high school students I know that are all Richland 2 students, and I was asking them specifically about metal detectors, and I was a little taken aback by some of their responses. I just asked them what they thought about them, and of course, they didn't like them. I can't imagine anybody actually does like metal detectors. However, they were very negative about it. I said, well, you feel safer with them there, don't you? And they said, no, we don't. People know how to get things past them, and then they give me several examples I won't say here in public, but and my question is, my only concern is, I guess not a question, is have we spent a lot of time with the high school students and polled them on some of the stuff? And I'm not suggesting we do. I'm just asking, and maybe that's something, if we haven't done it, we may consider it, but I just was surprised by the answers I got from them. I thought they would be somewhat relieved about metal detectors in the school.
I will say that it's varied because I think even our student representative, one of the things that she said was that a lot of the students, it wasn't just about feeling safe, and she knew that metal detectors is not going to stop every single thing, but the fact that they were there did make her and many of the students feel safe as well. Was a lot of the feedback that we have gotten received.
I think some of the feedback we've gotten has been the perception of safety, and I think that's true from the parents we have talked to and you have talked to also. And we have to remember what Sheriff Lott has told us on numerous occasions. They are only a deterrent. And I consistently talk about we have a layered approach. We have strategics. We've done, the enhancements to the schools that Mr. Anderson has talked to you about many times. And again, it is a deterrent.
Madam Chair.
Oh, sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
I participated in I believe it's Delta Days with the board earlier last week, and I got some feedback from a student who stated that one thing that would make them feel more heard would be that when the whole see something, say something motto that's being pushed is if students report something, they would like to get some sort of feedback knowing that items that they share are received and are helpful, because they understand that it's supposed to be confidential, but for some reason they felt that it's not doing anything because they say something and they don't ever hear anything back. But just that acknowledgement might make them feel more as though the see something, say something is making a difference.
Thank you, Mrs. Porter. Go ahead.
I just had one more thing, and that was just, I want to encourage everybody, if you guys did not, that's for everybody watching as well, see the last meeting and the meeting before that for safety and security, they laid out a lot of things that are already being put in place, some which I had no idea were in place. So make sure that you guys go check out. I think there were some new things. There were some enhancements that have been done as well. So all of those things, make sure you go back and review those two specific meetings that were streamed last week and the one before that, because there was a lot of great information in those about deterrent.
Sorry, Madam Chair.
Mrs. Nash? Or, excuse me, Mrs. Porter.
One more thing. In June, it's Gun Violence Awareness Month. And when you were talking about the PSA, I thought about a student. I went to visit Richland Northeast last week, and I met a student in the Convergence Media Department. And so it's Lillian, I don't want to mess up her last name, but it's Lillian Mirosevich. And she won 3rd place out of 3,000 students. And it was a video that she had created for gun violence. And it was a competition for C-SPAN. So that may be something that you want to look into. And she's one of their broadcasters that is on that show, so that news show.
All right, thank you, Mrs. Porter. Any other comments? Mrs. McFadden?
I was just going to make a statement that I was unaware that the metal detectors that we're supposed to be purchasing are mobile metal detectors. I just wanted to know if that was a consensus and how we're moving forward with that. Are we making a recommendation for them to go ahead and start purchasing now, or is that going to be after the next meeting?
Mr. Anderson, would you like to address that question, please?
Yes, ma'am. Our safety and security team, as part of their implementation, they've done a lot of research and talked to many people, part of the procurement process, did an RFP and through state contract looked at what was the best method. And we made a determination that the mobile metal detectors was the best use of our resources in order to do that. So that's why we have made that recommendation to use the mobile.
Are you all looking for us to make a recommendation to purchase those at any time soon, or how are we moving forward with that? Are they already being purchased, or?
I mean, typically, we purchase the metal detectors in any piece of equipment that we seem fit to purchase based on the budget we get from either capital or general fund. The things that we had brought to your attention was the staffing component of that, because that's a recurring cost. Metal detectors, we've had numerous ones in the past for all the sporting events and different things, so we're not requesting to purchase that. We're in our plans, an improvement plan is to purchase more metal detectors. The things that at some point when you get to your budget, we'd have to have the staffing to approve those budgets.
So are the metal detectors purchased yet?
We've purchased 12, and we've got a PO for the other ones, I think, Mark, is that right? 23 or 26 through state contract.
So there's 12 already purchased, and there's 26 that are being purchased right now.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the other part is that you're going to need us to approve the budget. Now, I did get the opportunity to go out and see the process for pop-up metal detectors. It's very interesting. And when they say they need 10 people, they're going to need 10 people based on the process that we have right now. And my understanding, when I suggested for security officers to be paid $20 an hour, my thought was getting them to an annual salary of $38,000 a year. Unbeknownst to me, I got the report, and that is $20 an hour for 4 hours a day. So that means that what I envisioned or thought we would be paying our security officers is not it at all. We're talking about 4 hours a day. So that means that one, it's going to be a part-time job, not a full-time job. So those are things that I didn't know about, and I just want to make sure that we're on the same page with this.
It's two separate things. So
we got our security officers, the gentlemen and women that are here that work, they're full-time Richland 2 employees. Those are the officers y'all may have spoken to at some other things that Dr. Scott had mentioned before about they had spoken about what they pay and recruiting staff at the current pay to do all the things we asked them to do. What I was talking about, the 4 hours, is contracted security on a part-time basis through our contract to pay for that. So paying security officers to help with the functions of keeping our buildings and facilities safe, and potentially, if we don't have the contracted staff to work the metal detectors, would be a function of a safety or security officer for Richland too. The money that mentioned about for staffing this is money that we've estimated based on some quotes from a provider to provide 4 hours and other to give us at least a budget number to work with on what that would be. So it's really two separate things we're talking about here.
Okay, yes, sir, but I want to be clear that our security officers that are working full-time here, that you're just talking about for this category over here that you talked about, I would like for them to be paid that $20 an hour at $38,000 a year to get them. That's not really, I mean, it's barely above poverty. So I'm just want to make sure that subsection that we're talking about is what we're going to talk about, increasing their pay, and if they're full-time, and to get a snapshot of what that looks like before we vote.
I believe once senior staff, Ms. Gregory, Dr. Miley, finishes the budget proposal to bring you next, you'll have different things in that proposal that will be for the board to vote and approve on, with variety of increases for a variety of employees throughout the district.
Mrs. McFadden, if I can just interrupt, that's a great discussion to be had when we start doing our budget reading, to propose that. Yes. Any other questions for Mr. Anderson? Thank you, Mr. Anderson. I have a couple of questions. The event that you're planning this summer prior to summer break, will that be a forum where constituents have the opportunity to come up and talk and express their thoughts or share ideas?
Okay, so what we decided was, and that's the whole group, is that we wanted it to be productive, but also didn't want people to just come and make negative comments. We want it to be something that is very productive. So people will be able to submit questions, but based on those topics.
Okay, then my next question is, how or who do the constituents contact to share ideas with the committee?
They can email us, which we have gotten emails, so
Okay,
they
so
email me.
just emails, no phone calls or meetings?
Okay, so no, there won't be any meetings because I am a board member, but I'm also a human who has a job outside of this that is full-time. And so I also don't think it's a great idea to meet with constituents one-on-one. That's for my own liability, but I also just don't think it's a great idea because I can't do it for everyone. If I can't do it for everyone, then it's not fair. So we're trying to make this a process that's fair for everyone, but also the big thing is productive. A lot of times you get in meetings and there's a lot of non-productive conversation. And so, talking to those people, Be Safe is on there. So that's one of the companies that we're talking, or groups that we're talking about providing, being part of the program, so.
Thank you, Mrs. Nash. And then I just want to state for the record, I appreciate, the efforts of the committee, you as chair, but express a concern that in the development of the committee, we don't have anybody from administration from either middle school or high school. And I think a lot of these initiatives that we're putting into place, the committee would be served well if there was in fact somebody that was continually on the committee and not called a few days ahead of time to come in and sit in on a committee meeting. Thank you.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Mrs. Nash.
Okay, so I think we've addressed this so many times ad nauseum at this point, but I'm going to go ahead and repeat it so that we can make sure that everyone in this room hears it. Ms. Gregory can attest to, and I spoke with Sheriff Lott, we came up with a plan. We could not have all of the principals to be on the committee, and so what I spoke with Ms. Gregory about and about to the administration, if they felt that anyone had, based on the conversations, the topics that we were going to discuss, the last meeting was an emergency meeting because we had an emergency. Now, everyone that Ms. Gregory and I spoke about is anyone that they felt could provide something to the conversation, which they did the first meeting, which you did not attend. We explained that as well, but you cannot. I've been on several boards. I serve on several boards now, and the most productive meetings are the one where we can have representative. I think our teacher of the year is a great representative, and he is also someone who has agreed that he can go back and have those conversations as well. But again, I'm not really sure where the 3-day came in, but again, that last meeting was one we felt we needed to have given the situation that happened the week before. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Nash. Any other questions, comments? All right. We will move on to item 12, agenda items for the next meeting, May 23rd.
Right, Tuesday, May 23rd, call to order, the approval of the agenda under executive session, student admission request into adult ed, student appeals, breach of contracts, employment recommendations, and certified releases. We will have our inspirational moment and pledge of allegiance. With unfinished business, no action requested, we will have a superintendent search stakeholder executive summary, and I believe that's going to be by Zoom, Dr. Scott, correct? Under the consent agenda, the approval of the consent agenda, approval of minutes from the previous meeting, classified employment releases and in-district transfers, and then an update on capital improvements. We'll have our first session of public participation and then voting on executive session items. We move to unfinished business, action requested, the approval of policy BID, board member compensation and expenses. 9.2 will be coming back on the approval of the district procurement code and exemptions. Under 10, new business, no action requested. 10.1 will have a first reading, as Dr. Miley explained, on the 2023-24 budget. Item 10.2, third quarter pupil services report. Mr. Smith will be here for that. And then agenda items for the next meeting. Second, public participation if needed. We'll conclude with an executive session continued again if needed and voting on those items, board and superintendent comments, and adjournment. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mrs. Gregory. Board members, is there anything additional that you would like to have discussed on the next agenda or future agendas?
Madam Chair, go ahead.
I do. I believe that Ms. Washington sent something in regards to wanting to have a discussion about the procurement code and our process that has taken place with the IG report, and that's not on the agenda for next week, and I think it's important. I mean, one of the things that we talked about in the last meeting, or our last workshop, was SMART goals, and our SMART goals were IG safety committee and also teacher retention, and there was in the IG and superintendent search. But this is a very big deal, and it's been coming up more and more and more in and around not just this district, but other districts as a huge concern. And I don't want us to be on the reactive side of something that comes up later if we don't have an update and are not able to make sure that we have addressed the issues that have been said in the IG report.
Would you like to make a motion? We just passed the policy, so if you get a majority vote, we'll have it added to the next agenda.
I would like to make a motion to have.
No, we just made that. Didn't we just pass the policy, BEDB,
It's the
that
draft
says if
agenda,
we've got
but
a
I'll do it if you
majority
need me to.
Actually passed to send it to the state to be approved. I'm sorry.
Hold-
And Dr. Molly can come
We're
up to...
talking, I think, about different things. I think
I think
you're
we
talking
are.
about P cards.
Yes.
They're talking about P cards. They want information as it pertains to P cards.
Okay, we said procurement code, but the procurement
For the P cards,
code is
sorry.
a follow-up where you approved it to go to the state, and then we told you it would come back to you for really formal approval, and that's where we are with that. It is already on the agenda, but you were talking more about P cards, follow-up with P card information from the IG report. That, for clarification.
P cards is what we're talking about.
Yes, ma'am. Okay.
That is something that I would like for us to discuss. I did have a chance to meet with Dr. Franklin today and going over the progress of where we are as a district with the IG report, and there are some areas that we do need to address as it relates to P cards. We have all seen the news. We have all read reports. And just as Trustee Nash said, we do not want Richland 2 to be viewed in that manner. And so I think that we really need to take it serious as a priority to make sure that we have the safeguards in place. But also there are some things that the IG committee has recommended related to those, and I want to make sure those are being addressed as well.
Thank you, Mrs. Washington. So we just passed the policy, BEDB, that says during a board meeting, a member may make a motion to add an item to a future agenda. If the motion is favorably approved by the board, the item will be added to a future agenda. So we can have a motion and a specific date, and then it will be added to the agenda.
So here's my question.
It does say, the email does say, yes, she can email it.
That information
But I'm just
was
saying to
emailed.
ensure that it gets put on the agenda.
Okay. Madam Chair, so going forward, at the end of every meeting from now on, we're going to be making a motion to add items to the agenda, because that's what you're suggesting right now.
That was the practice of the previous board. I know, that's in policy, so now you can do that. It's in policy. You just make a motion, and then we vote on it, and then it goes on to the agenda. That is in policy. You can also have, if 3 people send it in. Is there a motion?
Madam Chair,
Mrs. Washington.
I'd like to make a motion that we add to the May 23rd meeting the discussion and an update for P cards for Richland 2.
Thank you. A motion has been made by Mrs. Washington. Is there a second?
Second.
And it's been seconded by Mrs. Nash. Is there any discussion? Is the motion correct?
The motion is correct.
All right. Board members, please vote. And the vote is 7 yes, 0 no. The motion carries. Is there any other discussion of agenda items requested? No further discussion. We'll move on to item 13.1, public participation. We have nobody signed up. Item 14, executive session. Grateful we do not have to go into one this evening. Item 15, we will have no votes. Moving on to item 16, board and superintendent comments. Mrs. McFadden.
I have some thank yous tonight. The first one going out to Mr. Nate Spells for coming to speak about the importance of construction and entrepreneurship. The second goes to Dr. Karis Maggi, principal at Blythewood Middle School, for hosting me this week and encouraged me to eat grits. I don't eat grits, but the grits that I had there on Thursday were really good. And also for Dr. Green at Ridgeview High School for allowing me to watch the pop-up metal detectors this week and the training on strategics that the staff went through. It's very interesting. So thank you guys for accepting me and welcoming me and showing up, Dr. Spells. Thank you so much. Have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you, Mrs. McFadden. Mr. Trapp.
Yes, thank you. I would like to share an experience I had visiting Blythewood High School a couple weeks ago. I went out there on a Wednesday morning during the week of the No Place for Hate activity, and I attended a breakfast with the teachers that morning before school. And we had several students speak to us about some various topics. I had one young man spoke. He's in student government, very exceptional young man. He really has a bright future ahead of him. He did say one thing, though, that if I understood him correctly, I was a little concerned by it. He said, again, if I understood him correctly, that there's more hate in the world now than ever before. And I thought about that, and I was like, you know, he's a young man, of course, and he hasn't seen the world us older people have. And I thought to myself, that, you know, more hate than, you know, that was in this part of the country in the 50s and the 60s, or even more hate than was in Europe, you know, during World War II. I just thought that was that just struck me, it concerned me. But then we saw a video. The video was shown to the teachers. Found out later that the video was also a part of a social emotional learning lesson that morning in first period. The video was called "Starbucks Showed This Short Film to Its Employees to Teach Them About Racial Bias." After the video was shown to us, we were encouraged to talk to the people at our tables about how we felt about what we saw in the video. Me and Principal Sherman was sitting together, and we were talking about other things, but that we were then encouraged, or the teachers were encouraged to share how they felt or the things they thought while they were watching the video. And of course, I did not participate in that. I didn't feel that was my place at that point. But I would like to share a few things here in our board meeting about what I thought about the video. The video basically, and I would encourage anybody to go, it's on YouTube. Please go and look the video up yourself if you want to see. The video contained testimonies from a lot of individuals that were full of anxiety and fear, and how they were somewhat paralyzed in their daily lives because of this anxiety and fear. And of course, all this anxiety and fear was based on perceived racial prejudice. Two of the quotes I would like to read from the video, just two that I thought stood out. There was a very prominent lawyer that said this. She said, quote, "We need to recognize that black people are navigating the public spaces differently than white people, and not use a shortcut that has been wired into your brain because of the society we live in that tells you when you see me, you should be nervous and you should be worried," end quote. The video concluded with the narrator saying these words: "Today, discrimination is against the law. It's the people and the systems that support our communities that must follow suit." You know, when I heard that, I thought to myself, well, what she's telling us is that the law says we should do something, but that we aren't doing that. And I took that disappointed me somewhat. I've been around a long time, and I've seen a lot of things, and we definitely live in a world, I think, that is much improved from what it was before I was born. I'd just like to say to the students that might have seen this, to start with, I can't imagine how this video is part of our social emotional learning experience. This video basically separated people into two categories, victims and villains. It separated everyone in our society into either the oppressed or the oppressors. And I would just like to say to the students out there that don't trust some of the people you hear that are teaching you things. You need to open your eyes and look around and look at the world you live in. We live in a world that is absolutely wonderful. I think it has to be the greatest time to be alive. We have incredible blessings that no other generation has ever had. And all that I see, and I want to point out that you'll see what you want to see when you look around. All I see in our society is people that get along, that are happy to be around each other, and quite frankly love each other. I genuinely believe in this community we love our neighbors. We treat each other with respect. I could tell you countless stories about people that treated me with respect, and I was surprised because I didn't expect it. And, you know, I guess it is true. Some of us do. We all probably have internal things that keep us from looking at people as they truly are. But we don't let those things hold us up. And when we recognize in ourselves, I think most of us try to change that. So I would just encourage the students out there, please don't be discouraged. I'm not surprised that we have problems with discipline and we have fights. How could a student not become angry or feel guilty when they see videos like this in our schools that are telling, that they're either a victim or they're the person that's victimizing somebody? Anyway, I appreciate the opportunity I had to spend time with the teachers and the students at the school. We really have some good students, and I hope that we can all have a positive influence in our lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Trapp. Mrs. Washington.
I just want to say thank you to everyone who tuned in online and in person. And this week is Nurses Appreciation Week and Teacher Appreciation Week. And I want to say to each of you, thank you so much for all the work that you do for our students and for our school community. Our students would not be excelling without your dedication, your love, and your protection. I want to give a special shout out to the Westwood JROTC for all the amazing accolades that you received, including my student worker, Christian Layton. Greatness resides in Richland too. It really does. In spite of all of the things that we see, greatness resides in Richland too. And May is also National Mental Health Month. And I'd like to give a special shout out and a super thanks to all of our school psychologists, our counselors, our coordinators, anybody who promotes mental health awareness. Faculty and staff, I want to encourage you, please take some time to rest. Please take time to seek out help when you need it. Get you a buddy that you can talk to, use your benefits, use your days off. We call them mental health days, but listen, I used to enjoy taking a ride to Charlotte. Use your days to take some time off. Reason why I'm saying this is because we need you, we value you, and we support you. And I also want to say a special thanks to Abby Cobb. You opened my eyes to some partnerships, and I am just so grateful for the work that you're doing in the spirit of our communities for our school district. The Northeast Columbia, listen, community, we have some work to do, and it's going to take every last one of us to not only just partner with our local schools that our children attend, but to partner with community organizations as well, so that we can make our community a much better place to live, work, and learn. And finally, May is National Small Business Month, and I want to congratulate a local business who's going to be opening up a seafood restaurant right here in the village at Sand Hills. Mr. Seafood, I want to say congratulations. His grand opening is this Saturday, May 13th, and he invites every last one of you to come out and enjoy some delicious food. Have a great evening.
Thank you, Mrs. Washington. Mrs. Porter.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Also, happy Teacher Appreciation Week to all of our teachers, especially to the phenomenal teachers that my own two get to have every single day. We love you all. I also wanted to thank Mr. Sims for hosting me at Richland Northeast High School. I really enjoyed my time at this school, and I learned so much about PCA, Horizons, Convergence Media. I got a chance to walk into the beauty salon and learn about the cosmetology program there. I did not know that you could go there and graduate and have your cosmetology license at Richland Northeast High School. And every time I turned around, he was telling me something else. I was like, geez, y'all do it all here. So I had no idea. And then it was a regular school day, and it was so peaceful and calm in the building. And I said, where are all your students? He said, they're right here. And it was just a great environment. So thank you so much for hosting me. Happy Teacher Appreciation Week. And I know it's a testing week for our littles, and but you're doing a phenomenal job, and thank you for showing up every day.
Thank you, Mrs. Porter. Mrs. Nash.
Well, I want to say a special thank you to Miss Lauren Gasser in classroom B7. I had an amazing opportunity to go out and see them talk about solid liquids and gases during StarCon at Sandlapper. It was phenomenal, and they just did a wonderful job. You guys are amazing, so if you get to see this, thank you for having me. It was just, you guys did some amazing presentations. Also, thank you to the principal, Miss Whitney Powell, and the entire staff for a warm welcome. I got to see some teachers that I know and meet some teachers that I didn't, so that was really great. And congratulations to all the turnaround students and their families who were honored last night. And then I want to encourage the community, just because I want to make sure you guys remember this, is to make sure you attend these stakeholder meetings about our superintendent search. That's a really big deal. We need your input. There's also a survey online. Make sure that you do that survey. Also, a reminder about the lunch debt. If you guys, I know they send out announcements, but I'm saying it here because I want everybody that needs to be graduating to graduate and not let a lunch debt hold you back. back. Also, it's Teacher Appreciation Week, as my colleagues have said. I just want to say, teachers, you are amazing, and thank you so much for all that you do. I would be nothing if it wasn't for my amazing parents and my teacher. And one of my favorite teachers, she is no longer with us, but one of the things that she said, I'm going to leave you with this quote, but it's love many, trust few, always paddle your own canoe. And I learned that in first grade. Have a good night. Thank y'all. Thank y'all for all that y'all do. I appreciate you guys as well. And for Georgette, thank you so much, Ms. Council, for helping me out today.
Thank you, Mrs. Nash. Dr. Scott.
Well, basically, my colleagues have really said it all. Ditto, ditto, ditto. But I would still say Happy Nurses Appreciation Week, and especially Happy Teacher Appreciation Week. I've served and walked in your shoes for many, 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 many years. Actually, 15 years as a teacher and 15 years as a school administrator. So I understand that. But I also understand, too, that no matter what you do, when the time comes when you have to really make a decision, when you've outgrown some things, it's time to move on. So I say that because in just a few weeks, I'm going to be sharing some bittersweet news. Happy news for some, sad news for others. But I will leave you with that. Just be on the lookout for my big announcement in just a few weeks. Thank you.
Mrs. Gregory.
Hi, good evening. I want to say Happy Teacher Appreciation Day today. Thank you to all our teachers for their dedication to the students of Richland 2. No matter where you are in life, a teacher has influenced you. Also, Wednesday is Nurses Day. We want to recognize our great nurses who take care of our students and staff members' well-being and safety every single day. On April 21st, the newest cohort of certified and recertified magnet schools, that's CFK, CFK North, Dent, Lonnie B. Nelson, North Springs, and Summit, were recognized at the Magnet Schools of America Conference. On April 22nd, Richland 2 received the National Donna Grady Creer Award for Magnet Sustainability, and it talks about excellence in magnet continuance and magnet sustainability. So we're very proud of this national award. Spring Valley High School and Bridge Creek Elementary were recognized as Merit Schools of Excellence at the conference, and in addition, Ms. Emily Eberlin from Muller Road Middle was selected as the National Magnet Teacher of the Year award winner, so we're very proud of her. So again, congratulations on a national award and also a National Teacher of the Year. We also recently learned that Richland 2 has received the Best Communities and Music Education distinction from the National Association of Music Merchants. This is the 5th year in a row that we've received this, and there are only 7 districts in the state that have received it. In addition, Richland 2 students continue to make an impact in the community. On Friday, May 19th at 11 o'clock at Adventure, we're going to make history, where we will have the ribbon cutting and soft opening for the MedVenture exhibit at Adventure Children's Museum. Our 4 MedPro schools, Rice Creek, Bridge Creek, Kelly Mill, and Ridgeview, have been working with Adventure since last summer to create plans for a STEAM-themed exhibit through the engineering design process. The project is the first of its kind where a group of schools collaborated to create a museum exhibit. So we're very excited. And finally, in the June Riverbanks magazine, our Richland 2 students are featured. There was a design issue with the special feed buckets that school personnel used during training sessions with the sea lions. The commercial buckets were breaking and were no longer being made. So teacher Nick Jones worked with his students and designed a solution that is being used at Riverbanks Zoo today, and it was featured in their magazine. And lastly, I want to congratulate Ms. Helen Grant. Helen received, well, actually on April the 20th, Mayor Rickaman had Helen Nelson Grant Day for the City of Columbia. And she was also recently awarded the Order of the Palmetto from Governor McMaster. So congratulations, Ms. Grant. Dr. Grant.
Thank you, Mrs. Gregory. And like Dr. Scott said, that most of it's been taken care of before it got to her, but it's pretty much been taken care of by the time it gets to me. So I will be brief. Happy Teacher Appreciation Week. Once again, I want to welcome Nancy Williams, our new CFO, and then a special thank you to both Patrick Kelly and Abby Cobb for coming and speaking to the board today. Have a great night. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Madam Chair?
Mrs. Washington.
Where are we? Oh, I move that we adjourn the May 9th, 2023 regular board meeting.
Is there a second?
Second.
The motion has been made by Mrs. Washington and seconded by Mrs. Porter to adjourn the meeting. Is there any discussion? There's no discussion. All those in favor, raise your right hand. All those opposed? The vote is 7 yes, 0 no. The motion carries. The meeting is adjourned.